Hey everyone, welcome back to my Python programming series. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about iteration. There are three kinds of iterations within Python. One of them being the for each loop, the ranged for loop, and the while loop. And we're going to discuss all three of those today. And on top of that, towards the end of the video, I'm going to go over more complex looping techniques like looping over dictionaries or other sorts of collections. So to start off, we're going to talk about the for each loop. So to demonstrate iteration, I'm just going to make a list called A. It'll simply be a list that's just 1, 2, 3. To loop over this collection or list using a for each loop, what we would need to write is the keyword for, and then we would want to write the variable name. So in this case, I'm going to call it num. So each of these numbers, I'm going to call them num. And then we want to say for num in and the collection that we want to iterate over. So in this case, the collection's name is going to be A. So we write for number in A, and then we want to do some sort of code. So in this case, I'm just going to say print num. And you could see that now it prints 1, 2, and 3. So all this for loop does is it iterates over every single item in this collection. And this is a for each loop. And essentially it is because we are using this iterator right here to iterate through this collection called A. Now this for each loop is really nice because you don't need to find the count or like the length of this list. So you don't need to know when you stop the iteration. The for loop itself will just keep going until there are no items left in this collection. It's not particularly good when we want to change the value that num holds. So if I rewrite that loop for num in A, and then I say, okay, num is equal to 4, what a few people might think would happen is that this number, each number in this case, would be changed to 4. However, that's really not the case. As you could see, nothing's really happened to that list. So it's not particularly good for mutating the original collection. Now this brings us to the ranged for loop. And essentially the ranged for loop, what it does is it's technically still a for each loop because it's iterating over an immutable sequence that the range function will give us. So the range function, let's say we say range 4, this will give us an immutable sequence from 0 to 4 being exclusive. But in other languages, you can have syntax like for, and then you would say like int I equals 0, I is less than 5, I plus plus. This would be something different. This would be a ranged loop in other languages, but in Python, it's kind of a for each loop just because range is technically it's a collection and we're just like iterating over it, but it's still ranged in this case. So we would say something like, okay, for num in range 4, and then we want to just print num. So in this case, all it's going to do is it's going to iterate over this range of 4, so from 0 to 3, and you can see that here it goes from 0 all the way to 3. Now, these loops are still good for looping over a sequence like this or a collection like this, and the way we can do that is by getting the count. So what we can do is we can say for I in range, and then we want this for loop to run up until the length of this list. So the list is called A. Now if we grab the length of A using the len function, this will return us the length of the list. So we will perform n iterations where n is the size of that list. So now if I go ahead and print I, you could see that it's going to print from 0 to 2 because those are the indices within that list. This is index 0, index 1, index 2. Hence why I call this I for index. So if we write this for ranged loop, we can actually mutate the collection that we have over here pretty easily. All we need to do is we need to access the element at each index, and then we can change that equal to 4. Now once this runs, you can see that the actual collection has been changed. So the for ranged loops, really good for mutating lists or other collections, like obviously if you can do them. But again, the for each and the for ranged loop, they're both going to have very similar applications. Now the last iteration technique is the while loop. Basically we're going to use the keyword while, and then we want to give it a condition. So something like this. And this loop will continue going on up until that condition no longer holds. We can write something like while x is greater than 1, let's just print x. And the key thing to note here is that we're actually going to need to keep track of what x is and make sure that we are working towards this condition. Otherwise, we are going to have an infinite loop. If I run this right now, we're just going to get a bunch of print statements. So I don't want to be doing that because we won't be incrementing or decrementing x. So in this case, I want to keep track of x. I want to work towards this condition right here. What I'm going to say is x is going to minus equal 1. Basically, each iteration, we're going to subtract 1 from the value of the x. And in this case, you can see we go 5, 4, 3, 2, and then lastly, x is going to hit 1. So x will no longer be greater than 1, and it will not execute this code over here. So the key thing to note is that while loops will continue on until a condition no longer holds. And the other key thing to note is that we will actually need to keep track of our variables, otherwise we could run into an infinite loop. Basically, the loop would never end. So those are the three main techniques for iteration. I've also showed you an application of possibly one of them, like the mutating the list one, but you can rewrite each loop as a version of the other. So we can write, for example, a for loop using the while loop, or we can write the while loop using a for loop. So now I mentioned I would go over more complex looping techniques. So for example, looping over a dictionary. So let's say we have a dictionary called DCT, and it's just going to have a couple of key value pairs. So there is our dictionary. It just has the string version of each integer. So the strings are keys, the integer values are values, and these are our key value pairs. Now the way we can iterate through a dictionary in Python is by saying for kv, so for key value in, and then dct.items. Now what this will do is it will kind of unpack for us each key value. If I go ahead and print k and then I'll print v, you could see that we'll first print the key and then we'll print the value. So dct.items will basically, pretty sure it'll give us a tuple of two things, one being the key, one being the value, and then we'll unpack it over here. But essentially, this is going to be a for each loop, except now the each is going to be these two separate variables, k and v, that will be assigned to the key and value through each iteration through these key value pairs. Now, a nice way of also keeping track of a value in a for each loop is using something called enumerate. Let's say that we have a list. So there's our list. It's just 0, 1, 2. Now the way we can keep track of the index that we're currently on through our iteration is by using the enumerate. So we can say for index, so I, and then comma value in enumerate, and then we want to enumerate a. I'm just going to go ahead, print I, and then I'm going to print the value. So you could see here it prints 0 and then 0, 1 and 1, 2 and 2. So this right here, the I corresponds to the index that the iteration is currently on, and the value corresponds to the value at that index. And enumerate is just simply a function that will return us a custom object that you can iterate over. Enumerate, again, it's really useful for keeping the count of where you are, like which index you currently are on. So those are the other two iteration techniques that I wanted to talk about. Obviously there's a couple of other ones, such as iterating through like a zip of like two collections. You can iterate over like reverse stuff or sorted stuff, but I'm going to leave that for you to find out. Basically, it's all pretty much the same. It's just a for loop, and then you can either unpack it like this, or you can iterate through a single element like we saw over here. So yeah, that's it for this quick little tutorial on iteration. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it and have learned something. If this video has helped you out at all, please like and comment as to what it helped you out with. Like usual, if you're new to the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's greatly appreciated. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in another video.